All right, everybody, this is going to be a video that will tell you how to switch out a bedside panel on a pickup truck. So here we go. And if you'd like to see this channel help somebody in need, then would you please take a moment to like and subscribe right here? So here we go. I'm just going to run through this video and kind of talk about it as it goes through. Let's see. So what we're doing here is we're tearing down the pickup truck so that we can expose all of the welds. There's going to be welds right here along the inside lip, inside the pickup bed, but just underneath that bed cap. There's going to be welds down this side here on the inside of where like the tailgate is. You can actually see it on this other side here. There's going to be a few welds on the underside down here. You're also going to have to take loose the bed brace bolt. There's actually a bed brace right here that will have to come loose because it's bolted to the bed panel. There's actually going to be this inner gas cap. There's like a interior piece there that does not come on the bedside panel on this particular model Ford. Some of them do, but most of them don't. And so you'll have to loosen up the 3 bolts that actually hold the gas neck that goes in behind here to the bed assembly. And you'll take the gas cap off when you get ready to actually take the whole bed loose, because you'll take it off with this inner cut in there. And then, so once that's loose, you'll have to swap that out and put that in later. And then there's welds up here on the front as well. I'm also forgetting the welds on the wheelhouse here. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually going to, some people do this different. I just like to air hammer the majority of the panel off, the parts that I know I'm not going to need. And it just helps with reducing the weight of the job. Now I won't have to try to trim out the whole panel and then take it all off. And so I can get the majority of the panel out of the way, and then I can come back. This is me actually cutting that cap off right there. And so I'll save that for later. But now I can go in and grind all the welds down with like a cutoff wheel or one of these little mini belt sanders. And somebody had actually fixed this bed before, and they did not weld. They only welded 2 spots on this wheelhouse, and the rest was glued, which isn't right. So it made it easy to pull that off. And normally there's welds all through there. So I'm just grinding the rest of these welds. And as I grind off a particular section of welds, I'm able to actually take that piece off because I cut the entire bedside panel off. There's a little welds for a little piece down here. You know, the way I cut that main part of the bedside panel off, I cut it off to where each of these sections of the bed, where the welds are, I'm able to take that piece off independently now. When otherwise I would have had to grind them all. If I had left the bedside panel on there and didn't cut off the majority of that midsection, I would have to kind of like peel it out. And it's just hard to break those welds loose, even once you've cut your welds. Sometimes there's a little bit of glue underneath it, and just like, or maybe just a small part of the weld still there. And so when you do it this way, I can grind a weld and then I can kind of jiggle that piece like I'm doing. You see me doing with my left hand. And just kind of jiggle it, and it kind of pops that weld loose. And so if you do that as you go along, then the piece basically just falls off as soon as you get to the last weld. But you can't really do that unless you cut the whole middle part of the bed panel off. Otherwise, you have to get a seam buster and do what I'm doing, and then run a seam buster down in between the bedside panel and the inner structure. And that's just you can do it that way. Like I said, you still have to would kind of peel it up out of the way to get it off. And you'll see it later when we actually go get ready to put the new bedside panel on once everything's prepped. What I'm talking about, how I have to worm it on there. So right now I'm going to go ahead and start prepping on the bed panel. And so what I'm doing is since we're just set up a small shop, um, I'm actually drilling 1/8 inch holes. Maybe I've already done that, and now I'm drilling my bigger holes. It's a 5/16 size hole, and I'm actually using a step bit. But I'd already pre-drilled all these with eight. I marked it. What I did was I actually took the old parts, I grinded off and held it up to the bedside panel, and then I marked all of the old um, spot welds from the original panel, so that my new holes are actually going to go directly over the grinded spots on the inner structure part of the bed, and so I don't really have to grind anything on the truck in order to have a bare metal showing, so that I can weld the bare metal and clean metal. So all of these holes are going to be perfectly lined up with where the original welds were. Get it back to factory as best we can. Um, so I'm just drilling down, like I said, to that 5/16 size hole, which is going to be factory spec, to get it back to true structural soundness. This is that welds right here I'm drilling. They actually weren't welded on the people who had done it before, just didn't weld there. They just glued it right there. So I'm doing all that, and then I'm going back and hammering and dollying all of the holes, because when you drill, it creates a kind of like a divot and the metal on the backside. So you're flattening that down. It's pretty sharp on the backside, so that it will perfectly mate to the bed. There was no air or no gap there for the weld. So now I'm getting ready to put the little cup in inner structure part of that gas cap area and go ahead and weld that on. I'm going to have to put screws on there. And disclaimer, I do drill my finger. First and only time I've ever done this in my entire life. So if there's nothing squeamish to see, but it does happen. Um, so I come back, and now I'm bandaged up, gloved up, um, working again. That was a pretty bad deal, I'm not going to lie. So I prepped the bedside panel. We're putting the bed on there. One thing that I missed earlier was Dad was taking the bed loose, and he had to heat up the bolts because there was a little bit of rust inside the threads, so they wouldn't just come loose. So he had to heat them up from the top and the bottom side in order to kind of cause that rust to kind of break loose, and then we could loosen up. And then I was able to grind off those front welds up here. So now it's pretty much you're just lining up your old paint line of the bedside panel and clamping it in place, mainly back here in the back left by the tail light area. That's the most important part. And then, of course, the front as well, because you don't want the bedside panel too far in um, towards the middle of um, towards this section here. You wouldn't want it too far in, because then when you bolt up the bed, it's not quite lined up with the cab right here on this side. So I'm just welding. This is not a welding educational video, so I won't. There's no like close-up shots, but when you're welding, you really should be wearing a welding mask because of the welding gases and smoke that gets emitted. But I typically will hold my breath and then blow the smoke away from me when I take off the mask. Helps, but and so yeah, I'm just putting my clamps on there, and then you'll see that I hit with my hammer. I know it's going kind of fast, but this is like several hours worth of work drilled down to 12 minutes. So, but I hammer down, I clamp it so that both panels, inner and outer, are clamped together, and then I hammer it so that I'm getting rid of any remaining gap in between my new bedside panel and the inner panel. Because you don't want any air. You want both pieces to be perfectly flush with each other before you weld. Otherwise, you'll have burnout. The weld just won't be very pretty or strong. But as I weld, I actually like to start usually at the top side of the weld, and then I'll just, once I hear the penetration start, which usually happens pretty quick, then I just kind of fill in the circle. Some people will kind of go side to side inside there, but I like to fill in the circle and end in the middle. Um, these are my um, holes there. And then the front, again, I also hammer after the weld as quick as I can while the metal's still slightly molten and really, really hot, because sometimes the edges of the panel will kind of peel up just from the heat warping and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and hammer those flat, and makes it look real nice. And then when you're grinding, you're just grinding weld. You're not grinding any panel that may have kind of warped and curled up on you a little bit. So that's pretty much it on the welding side. Now it's just a matter of getting your grinder out, and you can grind these without having to wipe and like finish it with Bondo if you use the right kind of grinding disc and you have a high enough powered air compressor to really, work those welds. But if you welded good with no porous welds, um, and you're able to weld them flat into the existing level of the bedside panel, um, then you can make these welds. I mean, you make that metal look super smooth. It doesn't even look like you ever welded it. There's no reason to wipe every single one of these welds. I used to, when I started out, I would, grind it with like this big rock, like a 1/4 inch thick rock disc on a cutoff wheel, and it left these huge grinder marks, and I'd grind it down too low. So that was just how I was kind of taught by the older school body men. And then I realized, well, I could do that, knock the weld down, but then stop before I grind too low, finishing out with like a 50 grit disc, um, on an angled grinder like I'm using. And you can really finish out the weld you can feather it out into the panel, and it's just all very uniform. And you can come in and hit it up with some 80 grit DA paper, um, and even 180 grit after that. But nonetheless, it's a lot better sticking Bondo on there, in my opinion. Anytime you can keep less material on the repair job, the better. Because it doesn't have Bondo when they weld it at the factory. They actually spot weld it, which you can spot weld these things. I've spot welded them before when I was in a bigger shop setting, and that's even more efficient. But the prep work on it's totally different. After you grind it off the panel, you don't drill any holes. You're just grinding the inside and outside. So that's pretty much it. We don't have any pictures of this one being painted, but we don't have any pictures of this being painted. But I'll show you the shot again, because the screen went away there. And then this is with the decals back on, and it actually trimmed back out, trimmed back on, tire on. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, if you'd like to see this channel do um, charitable things, I guess, and helping people out in need, whether it be like giving them money or just doing some fun, unique stuff. I'll think about it more later. But if you'll help support this channel for us to be able to do things like that, just like and subscribe right here, and we'll do some of that. Appreciate it, everybody.